Hello, I'm Faisal, and welcome to another episode of So What Do You Actually Do? A channel dedicated to students and employees alike further understand their future roles. If this is something that interests you, then hey, subscribe and stick around. This is episode 11 of our tech series. In this episode, I got the chance to interview Faisal. Faisal is a product design engineer that works for Meta. In this episode, Faisal describes what he does for Meta, the difference between a product designer and a product design engineer, the product lifecycle from his lens. Furthermore, he talks about what softwares and tools he uses on the daily, how someone can land a job at a big tech company, and lastly, advice for how to be successful in this role and the career in general. Let's get to it. So, what do you do for Meta?
So, like you said, the title product design engineer could be a little bit confusing or a little bit long, but I can break it down. Um, Basically, a product design engineer is responsible for the design and integration of any like physical product that you see. It can be applied to a lot of different industries. For my specific case, I've done work on some sort of medical devices and agricultural devices earlier on in my career when I was doing consulting. But most relevantly, at Meta, we make consumer products, consumer electronics. So for the past almost 4 years now, I've been working on designing and integrating EMG electrodes, as EMG stands for electromyography, particularly for wearable wristbands. So these devices are kind of like a watch, but without the face. When the user wears them, they pick up the electrical signals that your brain sends to your muscles on your wrist, and it allows the user to interact with technology like various devices in kind of like an intuitive and seamless way.
This is really cool. It still feels like I'm talking to someone from the future with the way you're describing it. Um,
That's what they call it. They say the future is here.
that's amazing. You're basically on the forefront of technology, cutting edge stuff, and to be a product design engineer, kind of like you're designing the future, is in a sense. A lot of times in mainstream and amongst high school students, college students, they see these flashing titles across from them whenever they go to career fairs, when they're looking up online. Product design engineer or product engineer always, or product designer always gets confused. Is that something that you can describe a little bit about the difference between them and what's the mutual circle between them as well?
Yeah, it's a very great question. I definitely agree that they often are confused. Product designer is, let me break it down this way. So you have software products where the product designer belongs to, and then you have hardware products where I, as a product design engineer, belong to. The product designer on the software side typically focuses on the user experience, and the user interface. So things like the aesthetics of the software product, where different buttons or drop-down menus are placed, the storyboard of how a user interacts with a certain app or a software tool. The engineering companion to a product designer on the software side is the software engineer. Now, switching over to the hardware side, where what we work on as product design engineers is the physical design, the mechanics, the manufacturability of a product. So we think through how are we going to pack all the technology that we need into the form factor that we're ultimately trying to achieve. The analogous to a product designer on the hardware side is a different role, and it's called industrial designer. So industrial designers are focused mostly on the similar things like a product designer would focus on, but again, hardware products. So aesthetics, how the user, deals or interacts with the product, the color, the material finish, etc. So those are kind of the breakdown of the two different terms.
Got it. That is really clear. Thank you for describing it. Can you please describe the product life cycle of the work that you do and kind of taking us through that motion from one phase to the other?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the world of hardware, the fundamentally product development is consists of six stages, I would say. So you start with a concept. So you identify a problem and you brainstorm solutions, or potentially you have a need in the market for some sort of new product. The second stage would be the actual design. You can start by doing sketches, just brainstorming ideas, creating CAD models, and refining that over and over. You always baseline against what your ultimate requirements are, but with the background that you have as an engineer, you ultimately want to have some sort of line of sight towards manufacturability. So you don't want to entertain, well, you can entertain concepts that are a little bit wild. That's part of the brainstorming phase, but as the cycle goes on, you want to start converging and narrowing down on things that you can actually manufacture and achieve. The third stage is the prototyping. So after you've down selected a few concepts you want to try out, you can rapidly prototype and build very rudimentary models of what the concepts are, and you learn from them. So that cycle keeps on going over and over, and you keep iterating. So you design, prototype, test, learn, and refine. You keep doing that over and over again. Um, I jumped it a little bit into the fourth stage, which is testing. So that's all kind of bundled in that iterative process. And as you've refined and you're getting closer to what we call like locking your design, so you have a very solid idea of how everything's going to be manufactured. You've done some set of tests that give you the feedback and the confidence that things are looking good. That's when you start transitioning into the fifth step, which is manufacturing. So there are always some considerations that must be taken into account when you move from like just prototyping, I don't know, several units on the order of tens versus high scale manufacturing when you're trying to build things at a large scale, like let's say thousands, thousands, or even in the case of big tech, millions and tens of millions. Think about how many iPhones are circulating in the world. So yeah, that manufacturing stage is the fifth stage, and then afterwards there's a handoff or like a transition towards the operations teams at which they take care of like the scaling and the ramping of the products.
This is very interesting, and I'm still really hung up on the way you described how there are partnerships within the execution of something or testing something. So, like you described it, you have one eye on how feasible the idea is. So, there's an idea feasibility test that's going on. But as you go along with testing that idea, you're having a second eye on how manufacturer or how feasible it is from a manufacturer standpoint. Do you guys have someone who is like a SME or a subject matter expert on that manufacturer piece of it to enable you guys to make those decisions whether that idea can be scaled out, or are you supposed to have that knowledge as you test out the idea as well?
Yeah, another great question. So really depends on the type of company that you're working at. So in smaller settings, you obviously don't have as many resources. So when I used to work as a consultant in a very small, lean team, or even in my experience at a startup, you have to wear different hats. So as a product design engineer with a background in mechanical engineering, there's a lot of these fields you have a basic knowledge of. So you have the fundamental tools. You might not be an expert at like let's say material selection or tooling design, aka how a certain plastic part is manufactured, but you do have a baseline understanding of limitations of different materials or different manufacturing processes that will enable you to kind of make educated guesses, or at least bound the problem into something that you can solve. In other settings like Apple or Meta or Google or any of those big techs that you can think of, typically are subject matter experts for every little thing. So you should go talk to your materials cross-functional team member and ask them very specifically about small differences in materials, and they will guide you with feedback. And that loop with cross-functional teams is ongoing throughout the entire development phase. So you keep, asking them questions, getting feedback, trying something, and then going back and forth.
I'm happy that you share the difference between working for a huge, tech giant versus a startup as a product design engineer, and that broad spectrum of responsibility or areas of responsibility that one might have, and how they can greatly differ between the two. So it allows, for someone to look for what skills or tasks that they should anticipate as they enter that field through different companies. So on this channel, we really like to give an insight towards the hands-on experience or slash the build up to get to that professional level within a certain field. So for the high school, college students, or people that are interested in career shifting, what tools do you use day to day, or you recommend for someone to start playing with and exploring and learning so they can get some sort of a head start towards that career as a product design engineer?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main tool that most product design engineers use, I would say on almost a daily basis, is CAD software. So CAD stands for Computer Automated Design. Think of I don't know if you've encountered this in your college career or not, but there are certain colleges that offer classes in SolidWorks or NX or Fusion 360, etc. Those are all software toolkits that allow for designing parts in 3D basically. So that's where you have your models, you model your part, your different features, and you can spin them around, take different cross sections, look at things from different angles. So that's the primary software tool. There are some other tools that you can add on to that from a software perspective, like different FEA, finite element analysis, or simulation tools like ANSYS, or I think COMSOL is another one. Those allow you to do different simulations also, like, in the virtual world, to get an understanding of different like structural feasibility, thermal simulations, like how the heat will dissipate across, different designs, etc. So those that's like on the software side, those two. On the real world hardware side, like I mentioned before, there's always a stage of prototyping, right?
Mhm.
So for prototyping, you need to be able to build physical things in the real world. So we typically have experience in working in labs. So things like 3D printers, CNC machines, hand tools. So that, allows a product design engineer to actually bring those designs to life and see them in the real world. I would say that combination of software and real world tools are the main things in our toolkit that we rely on in order to progress the designs. But also, like I mentioned before, a product design engineer job is very cross-functional heavy. So there's a lot of collaboration with different team members and tracking of project work and progress. So expect that you'll have presentations to make in order to communicate your designs. There are different project management programs that are typically utilized in order to keep track of things like Jira or Confluence. All of these are used to manage projects and communicate things across teams.
So yeah, and this is a great bridge to our next question. What is your recommendation or advice for someone who is interested to land a job with a big tech company?
So obviously classwork, doing well in college, having a strong fundamental like technical background is important because those things will be tested in interviews typically. Besides that, having a strong portfolio, so working on projects where you design and create and make different things in your college, try to take those classes. That will help you build a portfolio that you could show off alongside your resume, so that it makes you stand out, it sets you apart, because you do have some experience going through cycles of building, so designing, building, and testing and refining, etc., like we spoke about before. More important than all of that is being like having problem solving skills and just critical thinking skills. So in our interviews, a lot of the times we don't really penalize people for not knowing something, but we do penalize people for not being able to think through a problem with different unknowns. So even if there are things you're unknown, what we really care about seeing is, how do you approach a problem? How do you break it down and try to attempt to solve it? So, that is very critical. And of course, there's always an accompanying aspect in interviews, and in terms of like skills that you need for the job, which are the soft skills. Those are also, I would say, equally important, because a lot of what we do in the real world relies on a lot of communication, collaboration, and ability to work in fast-paced environments. So like I said, yeah, the on the technical side, the fundamentals, being able to think clearly and solve problems, and then on the soft skills sides, communication, speaking clearly, etc. Having all that is great, but in the real world, you really need to have a strong network. So I highly recommend, keeping in touch with people in your classes, keeping in touch with alumni, reaching out to different engineers on LinkedIn, going to industry events in order to get referrals. Because typically referrals are a lot better at landing you that first interview where you can show off your portfolio and your fundamentals knowledge in mechanical engineering. So that element is also very important, besides, how good you are as an engineer.
That's the reality of things that you basically summarized there. Our world is not just how good you are at a certain discipline, but it is also how can you connect with people and leverage those relationships to land a job. So connections are so important. Knowing how to portray yourself in an elevator pitch that is no longer than 15 to 30 seconds. Things that are skills that are so important to be taught so early on. And it will really take you really far in life. So with this, we'd like to end the episode with a piece of advice that you can share with those that are so interested in a career like yours as a product design engineer. I know you've mentioned so much already in the episode, but what else would you want to say as final remarks?
Yeah, definitely. So if you, the best advice I can give is advice that I have kind of developed myself, looking back at my story. So if you find yourself enjoying, building things, taking apart different gadgets, working on, with physical things, if you have the curiosity for like how a certain device works, or even how mechanisms work, if you have a question like, oh, how does a car engine actually work? That could guide you towards, being a mechanical engineer, and specifically a mechanical design engineer. So if you find yourself in asking those questions and you're interested in that, I would say try to get hands-on as early as possible. So get involved in different teams that you have in your school for, building and competing with other people. Like I know there's Formula One, Formula SAE cars, there's all sorts of teams. So, get involved, build things, take apart gadgets, work outside of just what you learned in the classroom. So don't just learn theory, but apply it, try it. You will learn a lot. There's a lot of things that will break in the process, and that's fine. So I would say, just get out there, get hands-on, build things, learn by.
Faisal, we've come to the end here. Thank you again for your time. I know there are a lot of people interested in this career, and it was mostly a very ambiguous type of path. Not sure how do you even get there? What do you do when you're there? How can you get better? So you've covered a lot of different fronts there. So I really appreciate that enlightenment.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully this is just a very quick, intro. But there's a lot more that can be found if you do your research online. Again, reach out to people, ask questions, network. A lot of your questions might not be the answers to your questions might not be very obvious if you just Google product designer, because again, it can lead you to the thing that we talked about.
Well, thank you again. And at this time, we will put this episode to sleep.